Hi guys, welcome to my presentation. Today I'm going to be covering the ACLU. So this is an organizational analysis of the ACLU, which is one of the leading nonprofit organizations that stands for like constitutional rights. The ACLU was established in 1920 and has transformed civil liberties through litigation, policy advocacy, public education, and influence public administration, ensuring upholding of democratic principles. During this presentation, I'm going to address five critical elements of the ACLU. So, the mission, the history, the organizational structure, and the operational environment, the internal and external cultural challenges, an assessment of its effectiveness, and larger implications for advocacy organizations. Um, Building on organizational theory, we'll kind of discuss how the ACLU manages internal conflicts, public impressions, and mission conflicts across a polarized society. My analysis based on the primary ACLU documents and some of the course materials that we had during this class. At the end, I'll kind of talk about some recommendations I have and overall give a conclusion on what my thoughts are. But I kind of chose this organization because, you know, I think in the news we kind of hear these big court cases, especially like in history class, we kind of hear about these big court cases. And almost 90% of the time, I feel like the ACLU is somehow involved. So I took this opportunity to learn more about the organization and um, kind of thinking into my professional career, whether I do macro level social work, just kind of thinking on how these organizations are structured and, learning if it's a fit for me, really, because right now I'm mostly doing individual micro work with patients. So this really gave me the opportunity to learn more about kind of the macro level organizations. So we'll kind of get into it here. Founded in 1920, the ACLU was kind of a response to the government excesses during World War One, especially those that came with the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 that stifled dissent. Um, Roger Baldwin, Crystal Eastman, and Albert De Silver are its founders. Its mission is to defend and preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed by the Constitution of the law of the United States. So, as we kind of see and we'll kind of get into this, but it's primarily unbiased and it's meant to protect the individual of, their rights. It advocates for free speech, equality, privacy, due process, and even for like controversial groups such as like whistleblowers, kind of stressing that equal protection under the law. The ACLU has historically used landmark Supreme Court cases such as the Scopes trial and the Brown versus Board of Education, Roe v. Wade. Today, the organization deals with modern problems such as the reform of criminal justice, immigrant rights, and reproductive health care, updating itself to the change of a political condition. Its nonpartisan nature allows it to question policies and administration from like Trump's travel bans to progressive voting right actions. The ACLU continues to be a constitutional watchdog using litigation, policy advocacy, and public education to influence public administration through protecting democratic principles in a polarized society. So, as we'll kind of go into it, I'm sure many of you have heard of ACLU, especially when, like right now during the current administration, when new things are brought upon. More than likely, the ACLU will sometimes step in to provide its standpoint and try to protect individuals here. The ACLU's organizational structure is decentralized, with national monitoring being balanced by the local autonomy, the national office guided by an executive director and governed by a board of state affiliate representatives determine strategic priorities, whereas 50 state offices focus on region specific civil liberty unions. Um, Issues. So whether it's specific to Nebraska, like here in Omaha, or it could be Iowa or Illinois, it has the main objective of ensuring constitutional rights such as freedom, speech, equality, privacy. And this structure allows the ACLU to react in a timely manner to threats in various contexts. The ACLU works on a dynamic environment that is informed by the U.S. legal, political, and social forces. The political changes, including conservative judicial appointments that's been kind of going on, undermines its litigation efforts. But progressive policies may agree with its objectives, but are still under scrutiny for their rights violations. Overall, I think public opinion influenced by such movements such as Black Lives Matter determines priorities of cases, evidenced by its concern for police accountability. So, really, I think the biggest part that I think is most useful to its structure is the 50 state um, accountability that it has. So it's able to stretch across and focus on specific needs of their constituents and people they're representing. Financially, the ACLU has 1.8 million donors and membership fees. As a result, it is independent of the government funding, which I think is very important if you're sometimes having to go against the government in some of these cases. However, this setting requires flexibility to maneuver the polarized public sense and the judicial terrain. The ACLU's form and aims to make it a sturdy champion, but external pressures challenge its mechanism of operation. The rapid growth and mission misalignment of the ACLU creates monumental internal challenges for its organizational culture. Membership increased from 500,000 prior to 2016 to more than 4 million in 2018, thus generating multiple expectations and put pressure on the cohesion. One of the most significant instances is the 2014 incident in which more than 700 employees resisted U.S. military support of Israel based on humanitarian reasons, but the board voted against it 54 in favor of protecting domestic civil liberty unions. This is a manifestation of the cultural divide between staff lobbying for global interaction and the leadership concerned with the old boundaries. The ACLU's 274 million budget supports a lean staff managing high-risk cases, leading to burnout and morale issues. The absence of formal mechanisms such as town halls or advisory committees um, kind of creates problems through dialogue. I think this lacks process risks, staff turnover, most importantly, and reduced effectiveness. I feel like so. Introducing participatory governance, like a periodic staff form or something like that, I think could bridge the gap between leadership and employees that align more with the ACLU's democratic principles. Um, Addressing these cultural fault lines is critical to kind of maintaining that organizational resilience in a really high pressure advocacy environment. The ACLU faces significant challenges to its public legitimacy due to that polarized perception of its missions. Conservatives argue it favors progressive agendas, while liberals criticize it for not being um, strong enough in the ideological battles, particularly when defending controversial clients or vulnerable clients. The Skookie case, where the ACLU defended Nazis' rights to march, remains a symbol of its free speech commitment, but it clashes with its modern liberal image. Similarly, in 2021, defense of anti vaccine mandate protesters enraged progressive constituents, highlighting the difficulty of maintaining a coherent public image. In public administration, legitimacy depends on aligning organizational culture with external norms. The ACLU's legalistic, nonpartisan approach struggles to convey impartially in a divided society, risking alienation of the almost 2 million donors and grassroots partners. To address this, the ACLU could adopt a strategic communication culture, training staff to articulate its neutral stance, and leveraging its 50 state network for public education campaigns. These efforts would reinforce its constitutional role, countering misconceptions, and sustaining financial and reputational stability. Legitimacy is critical for the ACLU as it's one of the biggest organizations that's an advocate and trusted by legal groups. A central cultural tension within the ACLU is balancing its historical commitment to free speech, absolutism, with its growing focus on progressive causes. Traditionally, the ACLU's nonpartisan defense of free speech set it apart from ideological advocacy groups. However, recent effort, including over 400 legal actions against Trump era policies like family separations, reflect a progressive shift, raising concerns about um, kind of the missions drift. The 2018 case selection guidelines, which introduced considerations of speech's impact on marginalized groups, marked a significant departure from absolutism, causing internal and external confusion. This shift pits staff advocating for equity against leadership focused on constitutional principles, risking cultural integrity and supporter alienation. For example, some staff push for broader social justice goals, while others prioritize constitutional based concerns, creating kind of this internal conflict within the organization. A task force dedicated to aligning free speech and equity advocacy could develop a unified framework. So, if there was someone or a group inside the organization, I think that could help create that bridge necessarily. This would foster a cohesive cultural narrative and overall strengthen the mission of the ACLU. The ACLU demonstrates strong operational effectiveness, particularly in like the litigation. From 2017 to 2021, it launched over 400 legal actions challenging policies like the family separations that we talked about, showcasing its ability to mobilize resources swiftly. Its $274 million budget supports high risk cases, meeting criteria for high reliability organizations with robust funding. This financial growth reflects its capacity to respond to constitutional crises effectively. However, weaknesses include staff burnout as a lean workforce struggles with demanding cases and inefficient resource allocation across competing priorities. Internal conflicts such as the 2024 Israel aid dispute highlight the absence of formalized decision making processes, leading to a response like petitions rather than a structured dialogue. Um, Pondy views reflect conflict as intrinsic to organizations, such as suggesting that the ACLU could harness it to clarify values and enhance resilience. Establishing regular forums for staff input, such as quarterly meetings, could improve the decision making process and kind of mitigate that burnout. Um, The ACLU's membership grew from 500,000 to over 4 million between 2016 and 2018, reflecting its ability to mobilize support during the perceived constitutional crisis. However, this rapid expansion introduced diverse expectations, conflicting its nonpartisan identity. Public legitimacy is challenged by polarized perceptions. Conservatives see progressive bias, while liberals demand more those ideological battles seen in controversies over like defending white nationalists or anti-vaccine protesters. The move to progressive advocacy seen in the 2018 guidelines that balances speech's effect exposes the danger of mission drift and internal dispositions and external disorientation. Um, I think in terms of the ACLU, essentially, I think creating that legitimacy as an organization of nonpartisan, you kind of have to be careful. in terms of what you're doing. So I think overall, I think there needs to be like a reevaluation of the values that they're doing, and whether or not that alienates people, I think is a result that's going to happen either way. To make it more effective, the ACLU should embrace kind of a number of organizational theory strategies. First, create those forums to redirect staff dissent, positivity, such as the that 2024 Israel aid disagreement, and so on. I think second, kind of work together with both staff and affiliates to rewrite that mission statement to make it clear that it supports both free speech and progressive advocacy and create unity. The reason I think that is because I think if you rewrite kind of that definition of the mission, you won't receive so many attacks like, "Oh, you're supposed to be doing this," and so on. So I think third, kind of create that strategic communication plan and train the staff to speak about its nonpartisan position and use its 50-state network for public education efforts to counter polarized perceptions. And I think lastly, kind of create that clear case selection guidelines to ensure a balance between constitutional values and counter um, kind of the vagueness that the 2018 guidelines introduced for the organization. So I think kind of balancing those cases that you're taking will provide evidence. What kind of work is the ACLU doing? The ACLU's analysis kind of provides instructive lessons for advocacy organizations. Pondy kind of casts this conflict as a means of value clarification. We kind of see this in the ACLU's arguments over free speech and progressive advocacy, implying that the groups can develop by harnessing tensions in productive ways. Advocacy organizations need to design adaptive frameworks to reconcile the fundamental principles with changing social needs without experiencing mission drift, while maintaining that supporter confidence as people are paying members of the organization. So the ACLU's experience demonstrates legitimacy issues in the polarized setting that um, where you need that transparent communications. Um, I think strategic allocation of resources is pivotal, given that the ACLU's $274 million budget puts a lean staff under pressure and rival priorities, thus exposing them to burnout. I think the ACLU continues to be like a key pillar of civil liberties defense, kind of championing constitutional rights in a complicated legal and political arena. So I think the cases that stand out when we started this presentation, like Brown vs. Board and Roe v. Wade, are a testament to the cultural impact this organization has. It's cultural tensions between the free speech and the progressive advocacy that's starting to become part of the organization, and its legitimacy challenges require kind of these new approaches through the introduction of forums and these strategic plans for the organization. I think the ACLU can increase in its effectiveness and coherence. These steps will kind of bring its internal culture in line with its nonpartisan mission, offering it kind of resilience in the face of polarization. The ACLU's experience provides universal lessons for advocacy organizations that call for the use of constructive conflict, adaptive frameworks, and public education to defend core values. I think the organization in itself is very important, especially in these times where there is a lot of there's a lack of political unity. So I think organizations that protect essential rights in a non-biased way are very important. But I think looking out for progressive missions, I think, is starting to become a core mission of the ACLU, and I think that should be integrated into the mission of the organization itself. So I had a lot of interest in this organization when I started this project. I think, as someone who works with vulnerable populations, I sometimes look to organizations like this to make that change. So I can kind of see why, as I was looking into the organization, there is this pressure. There is this pressure to make that change within the organization. So I think some of these strategies that I kind of introduced here could definitely help the organization. But overall, I think it was very helpful for me to learn more about this organization that I've heard so much about, and I think it pops up into our media every day. So overall, I kind of enjoyed this experience, and if you come across any news, more than likely you will come to this organization when, especially right now, reading those news. Um, Here are my references, and thank you. I appreciate you watching this and listening to this. If you have any questions regarding my presentation, just go ahead and send me an email. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.